John Murray adjusts his chauffeur's cap in the rearview mirror, eyes steady, as rain hammers the luxury sedan. Inside, the prestigious Whitmores, parents of his fiancée Amber, speak freely, unaware of his true identity. William Whitmore's voice cuts through the storm. Once he puts that ring on her finger, his billions become our safety net. Vivian laughs delicately, adding, Amber actually believes he loves her for her mind. How convenient. John's knuckles whiten on the steering wheel as they casually discuss using their daughter as financial collateral. After decades building his fortune through honest work, John now witnesses the ultimate betrayal, not just of himself, but of the woman he truly loves. These calculating socialites have underestimated him severely. Behind the chauffeur's uniform beats the heart of a man who built an empire by seeing through deception. Their day of reckoning approaches, and John Murray will deliver it personally. If you've ever sensed something wasn't right about a relationship, you'll understand John's next step. John Murray straightened his bow tie, studying his reflection in the penthouse window. At 68, his face carried the earned lines of someone who'd built something from nothing. Tonight's charity gala would mark his third public appearance with Amber Whitmore, and despite his natural caution, he found himself looking forward to seeing her. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Murray?" asked Maria, his housekeeper of 20 years. "No, thank you. I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." "Meeting with Miss Whitmore's parents again?" Maria's question carried a hint of concern. John smiled. "They're quite interested in my foundation work." Maria replied, the single syllable carrying decades of protective loyalty. "I'm sure they are." John appreciated her concern. Finding love at his age had surprised him, especially after dedicating his life to building Murray Innovations from a small engineering firm into a billion-dollar technology leader. Relationships had always taken second place to his work, until Amber. Unlike others who'd pursued him, her interest seemed genuine, her conversations substantive rather than performative. His phone chimed with a text from Amber. "Can't wait to see you tonight, reading that book you recommended." He smiled. Their connection had begun over a shared love of historical biographies, hardly the gold-digger approach he'd grown wary of. Still, the businessman in him remained alert. Trust came slowly after decades watching people approach him for what he had rather than who he was. Descending to the garage, John nodded to his driver. "Evening, Thomas. The Riverside Foundation Gala, please." As the car glided through evening traffic, John reviewed mental notes about the Whitmores. William and Vivian presented themselves as pillars of old money society, but something about their polished veneer occasionally caught his attention, like watching actors who occasionally slipped character. The grand ballroom glittered with Manhattan's elite when John arrived. He immediately spotted Amber across the room, her genuine smile distinct among practiced social expressions. Beside her, William and Vivian Whitmore maintained court with practiced ease. "John!" Amber reached him first, her embrace warm and unaffected. "I was just telling the Hendersons about your new educational initiative." William approached, champagne in hand. "Murray, splendid timing. We were discussing philanthropic approaches." He guided John toward a cluster of silver-haired trustees. "John here has pledged $7 million to inner-city STEM programs. Quite generous with his tax deductions, aren't you?" The slight was subtle, positioning John's genuine commitment as mere tax strategy. John noticed several trustees exchange glances. "I believe in investing where it matters," John replied evenly. "Financial returns aren't always measured quarterly." The evening progressed with similar moments, small undermining comments from William, echoed by Vivian's carefully timed observations about new approaches to old traditions. John maintained his composure, attributing their behavior to generational differences in philanthropic philosophy. During dinner, however, he noticed something peculiar. When asked about their Hampton estate, William smoothly redirected the conversation, while Vivian mentioned renovations that seemed to conflict with statements they'd made previously. More curious was their detailed knowledge of John's recent acquisition of technology patents, information he hadn't shared publicly. "Your parents seem quite informed about my business dealings," John mentioned quietly to Amber as they shared a dance. "Dad follows financial news religiously," she replied. "He's always been fascinated by self-made success stories." Later, as John collected his coat, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Quite a proposal you made to the foundation," said George Palmer, his attorney of 30 years and closest friend. His expression remained neutral, but John recognized the slight furrow between his brows, George's tell when something concerned him. "I've been meaning to call you about that," John replied. "Do that," George said simply. "Soon." On the drive home, John reflected on the evening's subtle dissonances. The businessman who'd navigated decades of corporate negotiations had learned to trust his instincts about people. Something about the Whitmores didn't align, their knowledge too specific, their interest too focused on his holdings rather than his work. He'd built his fortune by seeing beneath surfaces. Perhaps it was time to apply those skills to his personal life. If you've ever had that feeling something isn't adding up, you'll recognize John's growing suspicion. The wood-paneled walls of George Palmer's law office had witnessed 4 decades of confidential conversations. John settled into a familiar leather chair across from his longtime counsel and friend. "So," George began, "what prompted this urgent meeting? Wedding plans already?" "Not exactly." John leaned forward. "Something feels off about the Whitmores. William knows details about my holdings that aren't public knowledge. They deflect questions about their own finances while showing excessive interest in mine." George's expression shifted from friendly to professional. "I've heard whispers. The Whitmore name has appeared in certain circles. They maintain an impressive facade, but there are suggestions of financial difficulties stretching back years." "What kind of difficulties?" "The kind where old money runs out, but appearances must be maintained." George opened a drawer and withdrew a file. "They've leveraged that estate in the Hamptons twice in the past decade. Their social standing remains impeccable, but their financial foundation is questionable at best." John absorbed this information. "I need to know more before proceeding with Amber. If I wanted to observe them unguarded, what would you suggest?" George raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking surveillance?" "I'm thinking verification. Something discreet that gives me unfiltered access." A thoughtful silence filled the room before George responded. "They're currently between drivers. Their last one quit rather abruptly after some disagreement over back wages." John's eyes met George's. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Murray Innovations has an exemplary corporate security division. I imagine they could create a very convincing chauffeur identity for a short-term assignment. Purely for due diligence, of course. 2 days later, John Murray, known to the Whitmores only as James, their new driver referred by an agency, adjusted the rearview mirror of the luxury sedan as he waited outside their Manhattan brownstone. The transformation had been thorough. Gray added to his temples, glasses, and subtle makeup, aging him an additional decade. No one would connect this unassuming chauffeur with the billionaire entrepreneur photographed in business publications. William Whitmore emerged first, barking into his phone. "I don't care what their policy is. Make it happen by Friday or find another firm." He barely glanced at John as he slid into the back seat. Vivian followed moments later. "William, did you call Henderson about extending the payment deadline?" She stopped, noticing John for the first time. "You're the new driver?" "Yes, ma'am. James Caldwell." Her expression shifted from concern to practiced charm. "Very good. The country club, please, and raise the partition." As the privacy glass rose, John activated the subtle recording device George had provided. Ethics aside, he needed certainty before proceeding with either the relationship or its termination. The drive revealed a startling transformation. The Whitmores' public polish disappeared entirely when they believed themselves unobserved. They berated service staff through phone calls, discussed leveraging social connections for financial favors, and most tellingly, argued about outstanding debts. "The creditors can wait until we secure the Murray situation," William stated firmly. "Once Amber finalizes things, our problems disappear." "She's taking too long," Vivian countered. "That prenup he suggested could be problematic." "She'll manage him. We've prepared her entire life for this kind of opportunity." John maintained his professional demeanor while his mind processed these revelations. The Murray situation could only mean one thing: him. Over the next 3 days, John drove the Whitmores to social engagements, financial advisors, and once, tellingly, to a meeting with their bank, where he overheard fragments of a tense conversation about extended credit limits. Each interaction revealed the desperate financial reality beneath their social facade. On the 4th day, waiting in William's study, while the Whitmores prepared for an evening engagement, John noticed documents spread across the desk. A quick glance revealed printouts of his company's private holdings, notes about his estate in Connecticut, and most disturbing, a draft email to Amber with specific talking points about influencing his estate planning. "You need to guide the conversation toward legacy planning," the email read. "Emphasize how important it is to protect his assets through joint trusts. Reference the article I sent about vulnerable aging executives." John photographed the documents with his phone, maintaining his composure despite the growing evidence of calculation. The Whitmores weren't just interested in his wealth, they were orchestrating a comprehensive strategy to access it through their daughter. The weather forecast that evening mentioned an approaching thunderstorm. John realized it would provide the perfect cover for what might be revealed during tomorrow's drive to their country club luncheon. Sometimes, nature itself seemed to set the stage for truth. Share this with someone who knows that sometimes the quiet observers see everything. Rain hammered the windshield as John navigated the winding roads toward the Westchester Country Club. The wipers struggled against the downpour, creating a rhythmic counterpoint to the thunder. In the back seat, William and Vivian Whitmore spoke freely, the storm's noise providing an illusion of privacy despite the partition being partially open for better air circulation, a request John had subtly suggested when picking them up. "Henderson is at his limit," William said, his voice tense. "He won't extend the loan again without collateral." "Which we don't have," Vivian replied sharply. "Not until Amber secures this engagement properly. Murray's more cautious than we anticipated. These self-made types always are, clutching their money like they're still poor." John's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but his expression remained impassive in the rearview mirror. "At least he's old enough to be thinking about legacy," Vivian mused. "That's our angle. Amber just needs to push harder on the family planning conversations." William laughed without humor. "As if she'd actually have his children at her age. But the possibility keeps him invested. Men like that want dynasties." "She actually believes he loves her for her mind." Vivian's voice took on a mocking tone. "How convenient for us." Once he puts that ring on her finger, his billions become our safety net, William stated flatly. The prenup is problematic, but we can work around it. The trust attorneys have ideas. And if she starts having second thoughts about the arrangement? Vivian asked. She won't. She understands her responsibility to this family. She's never defied us before. She won't start now. The conversation shifted to specific financial figures, the exact amount of their underwater mortgage, outstanding credit lines, and calculations of what percentage of John's wealth they would need to redirect to solve their problems permanently. He's essentially our retirement plan, William concluded as the car approached the country club. Amber is the investment that will finally pay off. John pulled under the portico, stepping out with an umbrella to escort them inside. His face revealed nothing of the cold fury building within him. He had suspected manipulation, but the calculated exploitation of both him and their own daughter exceeded his worst assumptions. "We'll need you back at 3, William instructed, barely glancing at John. "Of course, sir." With 2 hours to wait, John drove to a quiet spot overlooking the golf course and reviewed the recording. Every damning word was captured clearly. Their true intentions documented beyond denial. The rain continued its assault, matching his dark mood as he contemplated his next steps. The revelation was painful but clarifying. The Whitmores saw Amber as nothing more than financial collateral, and him as merely the wealthy solution to their problems. But one question remained unanswered. Was Amber complicit or another victim of her parents' manipulation? When the luncheon ended, John drove the Whitmores to their Manhattan brownstone. They continued their unguarded conversations, mentioning an upcoming dinner engagement that would leave the house empty for at least 2 hours. "I'll need you back at 7 to take us to the Hendersons," William instructed as they exited the car. "Yes, sir," John replied, already formulating his plan. At precisely 7:15 p.m., with the Whitmores safely delivered to their dinner engagement, John used the service entrance to access the brownstone. As the family's driver, his presence at the house while they were out wouldn't raise suspicions if noticed. In William's study, John methodically searched for additional evidence. The bottom drawer of the desk contained what he was looking for, a folder labeled simply AM. Inside were letters spanning years, revealing a disturbing pattern of parental manipulation. One letter from William to Amber during her college years read, "Remember that your choices reflect on this family. The Larson boy has no prospects or connections of value. Reconsider this relationship immediately." More recent correspondence included specific coaching about John. Mention your interest in his charitable foundation. Research suggests he responds to intellectual engagement. Wear the blue dress. It suggests seriousness while remaining feminine. Most damning was a letter John found from Vivian to William, accidentally filed with the others. Amber's showing reluctance about the Murray strategy. Remind her of her responsibility to this family. Without this marriage, we lose everything. John photographed each document methodically, his heart heavy not just for himself, but for Amber. The evidence suggested she had been raised as an investment rather than a daughter, groomed to secure financial salvation for her parents through a strategic marriage. As he replaced the documents and prepared to leave, John noticed family photographs on the bookshelf. They showed Amber's progression from a joyful child to a young woman with an increasingly practiced smile. The most recent photos showed her with him, her expression warmer, but her eyes carrying a hint of something he now recognized as conflict. John left the brownstone unseen, his mind processing everything he had discovered. The thunderstorm had passed, but the revelations it had brought would permanently alter the landscape of his life. Back in his penthouse, John spread the evidence before him: photographs, recordings, notes. The businessman who had built an empire by making clear-eyed decisions now faced perhaps his most difficult choice: how to proceed with both the Whitmores and with Amber. A late-night call to George outlined the discoveries. "It's worse than we thought," John concluded. "They're underwater financially and see me as their salvation." They've been coaching Amber for years on how to secure wealthy partners. "And Amber's involvement?" George asked. "Unclear. Some evidence suggests reluctance on her part, but I need to be certain before confronting anyone." "Proceed carefully, John. This isn't a business negotiation. There are hearts involved." John ended the call and stood at his window, watching the city lights blur through remnants of rain. His path forward would require the same methodical approach that had built his success, but with one critical difference. This time, the stakes were deeply personal. The service entrance of the Whitmore brownstone opened quietly as Eleanor Henderson, the housekeeper of 26 years, stepped out for her morning break. She seemed unsurprised to find John, still in his chauffeur persona, waiting with 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, James," she said, accepting the offered cup. "You're early today." "I wanted to ask about the family's preferences," John replied. "Still learning the routine." Eleanor studied him over her coffee. "You don't much look like a career driver to me." "Oh? Hands too soft, and you watch them like you're studying something." John considered his options before making a calculated decision. "You've been with the family a long time, Eleanor." "Long enough to see the pattern," she replied cryptically. "What pattern would that be?" Eleanor glanced around before speaking quietly. "The Whitmores have been living beyond their means for decades. William's father left them less than they pretend, and what remained they've squandered trying to maintain appearances. And Miss Amber?" A genuine sadness crossed Eleanor's face. "Raised to be their salvation. Every accomplishment, every relationship, all measured by what it could provide the family. I've watched them push her toward one wealthy prospect after another." "Is she aware?" John asked carefully. "Partly, I think. She's smart, but loyal to a fault. They've convinced her that family obligation transcends everything." Eleanor paused. "She seems different with you, though. The real you, not this chauffeur character you're playing." John couldn't hide his surprise. "I've worked for wealthy families my entire life, Mr. Murray. I recognize faces, even disguised ones. Your secret is safe with me." "Why tell me this?" "Because Amber deserves better than being her parents' investment strategy, and you deserve the truth before making any permanent decisions." Eleanor checked her watch. "I should get back. They believe the right appearance can solve any problem, including financial ruin." John considered this unexpected ally as she returned inside. Eleanor's confirmation aligned with his discoveries while adding crucial context: Amber as victim rather than conspirator, trapped in patterns established long before she met him. That afternoon, John met Amber for lunch at a quiet restaurant overlooking Central Park. He studied her with new awareness, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders when her parents were mentioned. "Your father called this morning," he mentioned casually. "He had questions about my foundation's investment portfolio." A flicker of discomfort crossed Amber's face. "He's always been interested in financial structures. I hope he wasn't imposing." "Not at all, though I was surprised by his detailed knowledge of some private holdings." Amber's fork paused midway to her mouth. "He probably researched online." He's thorough that way. Some of that information isn't public, John said gently. She set down her fork. My father can be intensive about financial matters. Family security has always been his priority. And what's your priority, Amber? The question hung between them. For a moment the polished exterior wavered, and John glimpsed the conflict beneath. A woman caught between familial expectation and personal authenticity. Building something meaningful, she finally answered, whether through my work or my relationships. She met his eyes directly. That's what attracted me to you, John. Not what you've accumulated, but how you approach life, with purpose and integrity. John believed her in that moment, saw the genuine person struggling beneath years of parental programming. Whether she fully recognized her parents' manipulation remained unclear, but her own feelings appeared authentic. Is everything all right? She asked, noting his thoughtful silence. Just appreciating our conversation, he replied. I value your perspective. The lunch concluded with John more certain of his next steps. Amber deserved to know the truth, but first he needed to confront her parents directly. The evidence he'd gathered demanded a reckoning. Back in his penthouse that evening, John methodically organized everything he had collected. Photographs of documents were arranged chronologically, recordings transcribed and time-stamped, notes compiled into a comprehensive narrative of deception. George arrived to review the material and advise on strategy. Legally, you're on solid ground, George confirmed. These recordings were made in your own vehicle where there's no expectation of privacy with a driver present. The documents were photographed, but not removed. The question is what you want to achieve with this evidence. John considered carefully. Not public humiliation or financial ruin. My concern is for Amber primarily. She deserves to know who her parents truly are before she makes life decisions based on their manipulation. And if she chooses them over you, then at least it will be an informed choice, John replied. I built my company on transparency and honest dealing. I won't abandon those principles in my personal life, even when the truth is painful. They strategized until midnight, developing an approach that would offer the Whitmores a chance for honesty before presenting the irrefutable evidence. John would meet them at their home, reveal his chauffeur disguise, and give them the opportunity to admit their deception before showing Amber the truth, with or without their cooperation. You're certain this is how you want to proceed? George asked as he prepared to leave. I've spent my life seeing through deception in business. I won't begin my marriage surrounded by it, John answered. Tomorrow, one way or another, the truth emerges. As George departed, John stood at his window, looking out at the city lights. His thoughts turned to Amber, raised to be an asset rather than a person, conditioned to measure her worth through what she could provide to her family. Whether their relationship survived tomorrow's revelations remained uncertain, but the foundation of truth was non-negotiable. He picked up his phone and sent a simple text to the Whitmores' house phone. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, this is James Caldwell. Something important has come up that I need to discuss with you tomorrow morning. I'll arrive at 10 a.m. Thank you. How would you handle discovering someone's true intentions? John's approach might surprise you. The Whitmore brownstone stood stately against the morning sky as John approached. Not in the chauffeur's uniform, but in his own clothing, a tailored suit that reflected his actual position. He carried a slim briefcase containing the evidence he'd gathered. For the first time in weeks, he arrived as himself, his true identity about to be revealed along with the Whitmores' deception. William answered the door himself, momentarily confused. Murray, this is unexpected. Amber isn't here. "I'm here to see you and Vivian," John replied evenly. "May I come in?" William's practiced charm activated immediately. Of course, of course. Vivian will be delighted. We were just having coffee." The living room was meticulously arranged, family photographs creating an illusion of warmth that John now recognized as carefully curated theater. Vivian rose from the sofa, surprise quickly masked by social polish. "John, what a lovely surprise! To what do we owe this pleasure?" Instead of answering immediately, John placed his chauffeur's cap on the coffee table between them. The silence that followed was profound, as understanding dawned on their faces. "I believe we need to discuss what you said during Tuesday's thunderstorm," John stated quietly. The transformation was immediate. William's charm evaporated, replaced by calculating assessment. Vivian's hand moved to her throat, a practiced gesture of distress. "I don't understand," William attempted, but his voice lacked conviction. John opened his briefcase and removed a small recorder. "Perhaps this will clarify things." He pressed play, and their own voices filled the room. "Once he puts that ring on her finger, his billions become our safety net. She actually believes he loves her for her mind. How convenient." John stopped the recording. "I have several hours of similar conversations. You've been quite open when you believed you were speaking privately." William's expression hardened. "Recording private conversations is questionably legal, Murray. Not when they occur in my own vehicle with no expectation of privacy from the driver. My attorney has confirmed this." John removed more papers from his briefcase. "These photographs of documents from your study further confirm your intentions." He laid out evidence methodically, the correspondence coaching Amber on how to secure his interest, financial documents revealing their desperate situation, emails discussing how to influence his estate planning. Vivian attempted a different approach. "You've misunderstood a concerned parent's natural interest in their daughter's future." "Have I misunderstood this?" John produced the letter where they explicitly referred to Amber as their investment and John as their retirement plan. As the evidence mounted, the Whitmores' strategies shifted rapidly, from denial to minimization to justification. "Our financial challenges are temporary," William insisted. "These measures were simply precautionary. You calculated exactly what percentage of my wealth would be required to solve your problems permanently," John countered. "You coached your daughter throughout her life to secure financially advantageous relationships. You researched methods to circumvent the prenuptial agreement I suggested." The Whitmores exchanged glances, silently calculating their remaining options. "What exactly do you want from us?" William finally asked, his tone suggesting that everything could be negotiated. "I want the truth, for Amber's sake as much as mine." "The truth," Vivian repeated, almost experimentally. "And what would that accomplish except unnecessary pain for our daughter? Amber deserves to know who she's dealing with, both me and her parents. I won't begin a marriage based on manipulation and hidden agendas." "So this is revenge," William concluded. "No," John replied firmly. "This is transparency. I'm offering you a choice. Either you tell Amber the truth about your financial situation and your intentions regarding our relationship, or I will show her this evidence myself." "You would hurt her just to punish us?" Vivian attempted. "The hurt comes from your actions, not from their revelation," John corrected. "I believe in Amber's strength to handle truth, however painful. Do you?" A heavy silence filled the room as the Whitmores recognized their position. Decades of financial deception and social manipulation had finally reached an impasse. "We could simply deny everything," William suggested without conviction. John indicated the evidence spread across the table. The documentation is comprehensive. Would you prefer she hear this from you, with some context and explanation, or directly from these materials with no softening of the blow? The Whitmores conferred quietly, their practiced composure finally cracking under the weight of exposure. After several minutes, William straightened his shoulders. When? Tomorrow, John replied. I'll arrange a private room at the Bristol Neutral Territory where we can speak openly. You'll have tonight to decide how to approach this conversation with your daughter. And after this revelation? Vivian asked. What then? That will be up to Amber, John said simply. I won't make decisions for her, unlike you. As John prepared to leave, William attempted one final negotiation. Perhaps we could start fresh, put this unfortunate situation behind us. There's no need to involve Amber at all. John paused at the door. That's not an option. Either you tell her with me present, or I tell her with you present. But the truth will be told, completely and without reservation. His voice softened slightly. If there's to be any future relationship between any of us, it can only be built on honesty. The Whitmores' silence was their answer. John left them to prepare for tomorrow's reckoning, carrying both the weight and the clarity of necessary truth. The most powerful response to manipulation isn't anger, it's strategic truth-telling. The private dining room at the Bristol restaurant offered both elegance and discretion, qualities John had specifically requested for this difficult meeting. Large windows overlooked Central Park, the autumn foliage providing a colorful backdrop to the somber gathering. Amber arrived first, her expression curious rather than concerned. She wore a simple navy dress that John recognized as one she had chosen herself, not one her mother had selected for strategic occasions. A private room? She asked, glancing around at the tasteful decor. This feels ceremonial. In a way it is, John replied, kissing her cheek. The familiar scent of her perfume, jasmine with subtle citrus notes, brought a moment of poignancy. How many of their interactions had been genuine, and how many orchestrated? Your parents will be joining us shortly. My parents? Her surprise was genuine, eyebrows rising as she took the seat John held for her. What's the occasion? Clarity, John said simply, settling across from her. Something important needs to be discussed. A server appeared silently, pouring water into crystal glasses before disappearing. John noted the slight tremor in Amber's hand as she reached for her glass. Some part of her sensed the gravity of the moment. The Whitmores arrived precisely on time, their public composure firmly in place, despite the strain evident in their eyes. William's usual commanding presence seemed diminished, while Vivian's smile appeared brittle around the edges. They had clearly spent the night preparing for this confrontation. Amber, darling, Vivian embraced her daughter with practiced warmth before acknowledging John with a careful nod. William shook John's hand firmly, his eyes calculating behind the social veneer. What's going on? Amber asked as everyone took their seats, looking between John and her parents. You're all acting strangely. The server returned briefly to take drink orders. John requested still water, while William ordered a scotch, unusual for him before evening. Vivian declined anything, her knuckles white around her clutch purse. After the server departed, closing the door silently behind him, John began, carefully. Amber, before our relationship progresses further, there are things you need to know about your parents' financial situation and about their involvement in our relationship. William cleared his throat, sitting straighter. Perhaps we should order first. No, John interrupted firmly. No more delays or distractions. He turned to the Whitmores, his expression resolute. Will you tell her, or shall I? The silent communication between William and Vivian was decades old, a wordless negotiation John now recognized from his days observing them as their chauffeur. Vivian's slight head tilt, William's tightening jaw, an entire conversation without words. "Tell me what?" Amber's voice had lost its lightness, her posture tensing as she sensed the undercurrents. William finally spoke, his tone formal, as though addressing a business matter rather than his daughter. "Our family has experienced certain financial challenges in recent years. Nothing serious, merely temporary liquidity issues." "What your father means," John interjected, placing his palms flat on the table, "is that they're facing financial ruin. Their estate is mortgaged beyond its value, their credit lines are exhausted, and creditors are closing in." Amber's eyes widened as she turned to her father. "Dad, is this true?" The moment stretched as William struggled between habitual deception and the evidence arrayed against him. Sunlight from the window caught the silver at his temples as he seemed to age visibly before them. "We've had some setbacks," he admitted finally, swallowing hard. "Nothing we can't manage with proper planning." "The proper planning," John continued, maintaining his even tone, "involved you." Understanding began to dawn on Amber's face, color draining from her cheeks. "What do you mean, involved me?" John looked directly at the Whitmores. Tell her how you viewed her relationships." Vivian reached across the table toward her daughter, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "We've always wanted the best for you, darling. Suitable matches who could provide stability." "Suitable matches meaning wealthy ones," John clarified. "Your parents have been guiding you toward financially advantageous relationships your entire life." "Our meeting wasn't coincidental. It was strategic." "That's not true," Amber protested, looking to her parents for denial. The slight trembling of her lower lip betrayed her growing uncertainty. Instead of responding directly, John placed a folder on the table, the manila material stark against the white tablecloth. "These are copies of letters, emails, and notes I've discovered. They detail your parents' systematic approach to solving their financial problems through your marriage to me." As Amber began reviewing the documents with trembling hands, John played selected recordings from his phone, her parents discussing their Murray situation, calculating how his wealth would solve their problems, referring to Amber as their investment that would finally pay dividends. The color drained from Amber's face as she listened, her fingers freezing on the pages before her. "How did you get these?" "I became suspicious of certain inconsistencies," John explained, his voice gentling. "I created a disguise and applied to be their driver after their previous chauffeur quit. For the past 2 weeks, I've been observing them unfiltered." "You spied on my parents?" Hurt and confusion battled in her expression as she pushed back from the table slightly. "Instead of talking to me?" "I verified my concerns," John corrected gently, "and discovered they were worse than I imagined." Amber turned to her parents, her voice barely audible. "Is this true? Have you been using me?" The moment of truth had arrived. William glanced at the evidence spread across the pristine tablecloth, calculating his remaining options before his shoulders slumped slightly. He reached for his scotch, taking a substantial swallow before answering. "We did what was necessary for this family," he said finally. "The Whitmore name carries responsibilities, traditions that must be maintained." "Traditions?" Amber's voice strengthened with disbelief. "You coached me on how to attract a wealthy husband and call it tradition?" Vivian reached for her daughter's hand across the table, which Amber withdrew sharply. "You must understand, darling. Family legacy requires certain sacrifices. We merely guided you towards suitable prospects. You referred to me as an investment, Amber said, pointing to a specific letter with a shaking finger. You literally calculated my return value to this family. That's business terminology, sweetheart, William attempted. It doesn't reflect how we feel about you as our daughter. It reflects exactly how you feel, Amber countered, her voice finding strength in anger. It shows exactly what I've been to you my entire life, an asset to be leveraged. The confrontation continued as Amber questioned her parents with increasing directness. Each answer revealed more about how thoroughly her life had been orchestrated for their financial benefit. From her choice of schools, to her social activities, to her career path that kept her financially dependent on them. The Larson boy in college, she said suddenly, a memory surfacing. You said he wasn't suitable because his family lacked connections, but he was studying to be a doctor. He would have had a good career. A country doctor with student loans, William dismissed, hardly appropriate for a Whitmore. You didn't even know him, Amber replied, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. You didn't know any of them as people, just as balance sheets. Throughout the painful revelation, John remained mostly silent, allowing Amber to process the betrayal in her own way. He watched as 32 years of carefully constructed family mythology unraveled before her eyes. And my work at the foundation? She asked finally. Was that just to position me in circles where I might meet wealthy men? Vivian's silence was answer enough. My whole life, Amber whispered, more to herself than anyone at the table. Every choice I thought was mine. As the painful truth emerged in its entirety, Amber stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need to leave. I can't. I need to think. Amber, please, Vivian began, reaching for her daughter's arm. Don't, Amber pulled away sharply. Not now. She turned to John, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. And you investigated my family instead of talking to me directly. I needed to be certain, John replied quietly, and I needed to understand your level of involvement. My involvement? Her voice cracked slightly. Did you think I was part of this? That I've been pretending to care about you? I didn't know, John admitted, maintaining honest eye contact. That's why I investigated before making accusations. Amber gathered her purse, her composure visibly fragile. I need time. Please, all of you, just give me time. Neither John nor her parents attempted to stop her as she left the room. The door closed behind her with quiet finality, leaving an oppressive silence in her wake. Are you satisfied now? William asked bitterly, finishing his scotch in a single swallow. You've destroyed our relationship with our daughter. You did that yourselves, John replied, without heat. The truth was always going to emerge eventually, better now than after years of marriage built on manipulation. You have no idea what it takes to maintain a family position in this city, Vivian said, her composure finally cracking. The constant demands, the expectations. I know exactly what it takes, John interrupted. Honesty, integrity, and actual financial responsibility, none of which you've demonstrated. The Whitmores departed shortly after, leaving John alone in the private dining room. He declined lunch, instead sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, watching the autumn leaves fall in the park beyond the window. The confrontation had gone as expected, yet the pain in Amber's eyes left him wondering if truth, however necessary, always justified its cost. The following weeks passed in difficult silence. John sent one message to Amber expressing his regret for the pain caused while standing by the necessity of the revelation. He received no response, but didn't press for one. Some processes couldn't be rushed, including the reconstruction of trust after fundamental betrayal. Through mutual connections, John heard that the Whitmores were facing the consequences of their decades of financial deception. The Hampton estate was quietly listed for sale. William resigned from 2 prestigious boards, citing personal reasons. Their social appearances became less frequent, then stopped entirely. George visited John's penthouse regularly, providing both legal updates and friendship during the uncertain waiting period. "Any word from Amber?" he asked during one such visit, accepting the glass of bourbon John offered. "Nothing," John replied, looking out over the city lights. "I don't expect there will be." "You did the right thing," George affirmed, regardless of the outcome. "Did I?" John questioned. Not for the first time. "I exposed a lifetime of manipulation, but at what cost to her?" "The cost of continuing the deception would have been higher," George reminded him. "You gave her the truth, uncomfortable as it might be. What she does with it is her choice." 3 weeks after the confrontation, as John reviewed quarterly reports in his home office, his phone chimed with a text from Amber. "Can we meet?" "Tomorrow at Riverside Park, 2 p.m. The bench near the 79th Street entrance." John's response was simple. "I'll be there." That night, he slept poorly, uncertain what the meeting would bring. Throughout his business career, he had faced numerous critical negotiations with billions at stake, yet none had carried the personal weight of tomorrow's conversation on a park bench. The afternoon sun filtered through autumn leaves as John approached the park bench where Amber waited. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, noticeably different from the carefully curated outfits she'd worn during their courtship. Her hair was pulled back naturally, her face free of makeup. John recognized this unadorned presentation as its own kind of statement. "Thank you for coming," she said, as he sat beside her, leaving comfortable space between them. "Thank you for asking to meet," he replied simply. They sat in silence for a moment, watching children play nearby while gathering their thoughts. A squirrel darted across the path, gathering fallen acorns with focused determination. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Amber finally said, her fingers laced together in her lap. "About my parents, about you, about my entire life, really. That's understandable. I was angry with everyone, my parents for obvious reasons, but also with you for investigating rather than just asking me directly." John nodded, watching a fallen leaf spiral to the ground. "I considered that approach, but if you were unaware of their manipulation, my accusations would have seemed outlandish without evidence. And if you were aware—" He left the implication unstated. "You needed to know if I was complicit," she finished for him. "I understand that now. Trust doesn't come easily to someone who's spent a lifetime seeing through people's motives." Her perception surprised him. Few had recognized the caution that decades of wealth had instilled in him, the constant questioning of intentions behind every relationship. A gentle breeze scattered leaves across the path before them, creating a momentary dance of red and gold against the concrete. "Was any of it real?" Amber asked, her voice smaller. "Between us, I mean." "That's what I came here wondering as well," John replied honestly. Amber turned to face him directly, her eyes clear and direct in a way he hadn't seen before. "I was raised to be what my parents wanted, the perfect daughter who would eventually secure the family's position through a strategic marriage. But my feelings for you were never part of their plan. Those were mine." "When did you realize what they were doing?" "I've always known they were concerned with appearances and social standing, but the extent of their financial desperation and their specific plans for me, no, I didn't know that." She looked down at her hands. Though perhaps I should have, there were signs I chose not to see. Their influence on my dating choices, their excessive interest in your financial affairs, their coaching about what to say and where around you. She shook her head slowly. I told myself they were just being protective, helpful. It was easier than acknowledging I was being manipulated. John considered her words carefully. We all have blind spots when it comes to family. I've spoken with them several times since that day at the Bristol, Amber continued, breaking a small twig between her fingers. At first just to confront them, but later to understand. Their world was collapsing around them, and they did what they thought necessary to survive. That doesn't excuse using their daughter as a financial strategy. No, it doesn't, she agreed firmly, which is why I've established clear boundaries with them going forward. They're selling the Hampton house and downsizing significantly. I've helped them find financial counseling, but I've made it clear I won't be their safety net. John respected the strength this must have required. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it was necessary, for them as much as for me. Amber paused, watching an elderly couple walk slowly along the path, hands clasped together. I've also been thinking about us, John, about whether we can build something real from such a complicated beginning. And what have you concluded? That I want to try, if you do, not as the person my parents crafted, but as myself. No strategies, no agendas, just two people seeing if what we felt was genuine. John considered everything that had transpired, the deception, the investigation, the painful revelations. Yet through it all, his feelings for Amber had remained constant. Despite the manipulations surrounding their introduction, their connection had felt authentic. I'd like that, he said simply. Perhaps we could start again with complete honesty this time. Complete honesty, she agreed with a small smile, though perhaps without the chauffeur disguise. This drew a genuine laugh from John, the first moment of lightness they'd shared since the confrontation. Deal. They spent the next hour talking more openly than ever before, about their childhoods, their true interests, their hopes and disappointments. Amber spoke of her passion for art history that she'd abandoned for the more suitable foundation work her parents preferred. John shared the loneliness that often accompanied his success, the wariness that had prevented deeper connections. Without the Whitmores' careful orchestration, their connection felt more authentic, not less. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences that neither felt compelled to fill. As afternoon faded toward evening, children and families gradually departed the park, leaving a quieter, more intimate setting. Amber asked the question that would define their path forward. Where do we go from here? Dinner, John suggested. At my place rather than somewhere public. Nothing elaborate, just cooking together and continuing this conversation. I'd like that, she replied, standing and extending her hand to him. The following weeks established a new pattern, simpler interactions focused on substance rather than appearance. They cooked meals together in John's seldom-used kitchen, enjoyed quiet evenings discussing books, and gradually rebuilt trust on a foundation of honesty. John discovered Amber's genuine intelligence and perspective, unfiltered by her parents' coaching. She revealed a sharp wit that had been carefully suppressed in more formal settings and passionate opinions on art and literature that reflected true engagement rather than social performance. For her part, Amber saw beyond John's wealth to the man beneath, his methodical approach to problems, his quiet generosity toward employees, his appreciation for craftsmanship in all forms. The businessman, whose calculated decisions had built an empire, showed equal care in nurturing their recovering relationship. 3 months after their park bench conversation, as they shared a quiet dinner at John's penthouse, Amber suggested a meeting with her parents. They've changed, or at least they're trying to. The financial reality has finally sunk in, and they're living within actual means for the first time in decades. John set down his wine glass, considering. "Are you certain that's wise?" "I'm not suggesting we forget what happened," she clarified. "But they're still my parents, and if we're going to have any kind of future, we need to establish whether a relationship with them is possible." After careful discussion, John agreed with some reservation. The meeting was arranged for the following week at a modest restaurant of Amber's choosing, neutral territory that reflected their new dynamic. William and Vivian arrived precisely on time, noticeably subdued compared to their former commanding presence. The designer clothes and statement jewelry had been replaced by simpler attire that suggested adjustment to new financial realities. Vivian's hair showed traces of natural gray that would have been immediately colored in their previous life. "John," William extended his hand with uncomfortable formality. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." The conversation began cautiously, with careful navigation around sensitive topics. Amber guided them skillfully, neither allowing evasion nor encouraging confrontation. John observed her newfound confidence with quiet pride. "We've been working with the financial counselor you recommended," Vivian told her daughter, fingers nervously adjusting her simple pearl earrings, real but modest, unlike the ostentatious diamonds she once favored. "It's been educational." "What she means," William clarified with newfound directness, "is that we're learning to live honestly for the first time in 30 years. It's humbling, but necessary." John observed the interaction with measured optimism. The Whitmores showed signs of genuine change, not complete transformation, but steps toward authenticity that would have been unimaginable months earlier. "We've sold the Hampton house," William continued, "and downsized to an apartment in Murray Hill. Quite a change from the brownstone, but more appropriate for our actual circumstances." "How are you finding it?" John asked, his first substantive contribution to the conversation. William considered the question seriously rather than offering a practiced social response. "Liberating, in an unexpected way. The constant maintenance of appearances was exhausting. We owe you both an apology," he added after a moment, the words clearly difficult for him. "Our actions were unconscionable." "They were," John agreed simply, "but I believe in the possibility of change when people confront reality honestly." As they parted that evening, Amber squeezed John's hand. "Thank you for giving them a chance." "I'm giving us a chance," he corrected gently. "Your parents will need to earn trust over time." The relationship progressed with careful deliberation on both sides. Unlike the whirlwind courtship orchestrated by the Whitmores, this connection developed authentically, complete with disagreements, compromises, and genuine growth. John found himself sharing business challenges he would previously have kept private, valuing Amber's perspective that often differed from his own. She began pursuing art history courses at Columbia, reclaiming the passion her parents had redirected. 6 months after the confrontation at the Bristol, they decided to marry, not as the social event of the season the Whitmores had envisioned, but as a celebration of authentic connection. John and Amber stood together in the garden of his Connecticut estate on a perfect June afternoon. Instead of the elaborate society wedding with hundreds of strategic guests, they had chosen an intimate gathering of 30 people, friends and colleagues, who knew and valued them for who they truly were. Eleanor, The Whitmores' former housekeeper, who had provided crucial insights during John's investigation, sat in a place of honor. George Palmer stood as John's best man, his friendship having weathered decades of life's complications. The Whitmores attended not as orchestrators, but as guests, their presence a testament to difficult growth. Vivian's eyes glistened with tears that seemed genuine rather than performative as Amber walked herself down the garden path, no one giving her away, a deliberate choice symbolizing her self-determination. "I never expected to find love at this stage of my life," John said during his vows, his voice steady but emotion evident in his eyes. "Much less through such an unconventional path. But I've learned that truth, however painful initially, creates the only foundation strong enough to build upon." Amber's response carried equal weight. "I stand before you as myself, not as anyone's investment or strategy, but as a woman who chooses this partnership with complete awareness and authentic love." As they celebrated afterward beneath string lights in the garden, John watched Amber share a careful moment with her parents. The relationship remained a work in progress, boundaries clearly established, but doors not permanently closed. William and Vivian moved through the gathering with humbled awareness of their changed position, no longer social leaders, but grateful participants. "Quite a journey from that stormy drive," George commented, joining John with champagne glasses for both of them. "The storm was necessary," John replied, accepting the glass. "It washed away pretense and left clarity in its place." As evening deepened into night, guests gradually departed until only the closest friends remained. John found Amber sitting at the garden's edge, looking up at the emerging stars. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. "Just reflecting," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret becoming our chauffeur? It would have been easier to walk away at the first sign of trouble." "Easier, perhaps," he acknowledged, his arm around her shoulders. "But I've never built anything worthwhile by taking the easy path." Their relationship would never be simple, too much history and complexity for that, but it had something more valuable than simplicity, a foundation of truth that could weather whatever storms might come. The path forward would require continued vigilance and honesty, from the Whitmores as they rebuilt their lives with genuine values, from Amber as she discovered her authentic self beyond her parents' influence, and from John as he learned to trust without reservation. Yet as they sat together beneath the stars, the possibility of that future seemed not just possible, but worth every difficult step of the journey that had brought them here. John reflects on his journey from the driver's seat of his own car, no longer in disguise but appreciating the perspective it gave him, controlling the view forward while observing the world behind. True wealth, he realizes, isn't measured in billions, but in relationships built on bedrock rather than sand. His investigation uncovered not just the Whitmores' deception, but also his own capacity for patience. The wisdom to observe before acting, to collect evidence before accusation. This measured approach, possible only through decades of life experience, prevented a hasty reaction that might have damaged innocent and guilty alike. In every family, truth eventually surfaces, sometimes through confrontation, sometimes through quiet revelation. The painful process of establishing boundaries often precedes the most authentic connections. For those who've navigated family deceptions, dignity matters more than politeness, substance more than appearance. John's willingness to risk losing Amber by revealing the truth ultimately created the possibility of something genuine between them. Age brings the wisdom to distinguish between real and performed relationships. John's lifetime of experience gave him the tools to recognize manipulation and the strength to demand authenticity. There's profound power in the patience and perspective that comes with decades of living, a strength often underestimated by those who equate youth with power. The Whitmores had counted on social pressure and relationship momentum to override John's caution. They failed to recognize that his success stemmed precisely from his ability to see beyond facades. The chauffeur's disguise provided more than evidence. It offered perspective. From the driver's seat, John witnessed how differently people behave when they believe no one of consequence is watching. Character, he observed, is revealed not in public performance, but in private moments when masks drop and true priorities emerge. The reader is encouraged to examine their own relationships through the lens of authenticity rather than appearance, to value those who appreciate their substance over their resources, and perhaps most importantly, to recognize that it's never too late to establish boundaries that protect both dignity and the possibility of genuine connection. The most valuable legacy isn't financial wealth, but the example of living with integrity. Building relationships on honest foundations starts with recognizing when facades need to fall.